the wind howled through the deserted streets of the small town of Harrowsville. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, and nothing out of the ordinary ever happened, until tonight. The night when the ambulance vanished. Dylan Matthews, a young paramedic, sat in the break room of Harrowsville General Hospital, sipping on his cold coffee. It was his first week on the night shift, and so far, it had been uneventful. The occasional minor car accident, the occasional heart attack, but nothing that had caused his pulse to quicken. He'd always known small towns were quiet, but this quiet? It felt almost eerie. It was a few minutes past midnight when the phone rang. Dylan's heart skipped a beat, the sharp ring cutting through the silence of the room. He wiped his hand on his jeans before picking up the receiver. Harrowsville General Ambulance. How can we assist you? The voice on the other end was soft, almost tremulous. Please, help me. I'm at the corner of Pine and 3rd. There's been an accident. It's bad. Please, hurry. Dylan glanced at the clock, his mind instantly calculating the distance. It was a stretch, but it wouldn't take long if they left immediately. We'll be there in 5 minutes, he said, trying to reassure the caller. Stay with me. Help is on the way. The line went dead before Dylan could say another word. He stared at the receiver in confusion for a moment, then grabbed his jacket and rushed out to the parking lot. As the sirens wailed to life and the ambulance sped down the empty roads, Dylan couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled in his chest. The caller's voice had been too urgent, too full of fear. He'd heard plenty of frantic calls in his time as a paramedic, but this one felt different. It was a quiet drive through the small town, the streets dark and empty. Harrowsville, a town that usually hummed with life during the day, was now nothing more than a shadow of its former self. The streetlights flickered, casting long, ghostly shadows on the pavement. Turning onto Pine Street, Dylan immediately saw the wreck. A small sedan was crumpled against a tree, smoke billowing from the engine. He parked the ambulance with the lights flashing and jumped out, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He grabbed a medical kit and ran toward the car. But as he approached, something caught his eye. There was no one inside the car. Dylan froze, confusion flooding his mind. The wreck was real. He could see the shattered windshield, the dented frame, but the driver was gone. Not a trace of blood, no signs of life. Just an empty car in the middle of a dark street. What the hell? He muttered under his breath, taking a step back. He reached for his radio. This is Dylan Matthews. I've arrived at the scene. There's no one here. Over. Silence. No response. He checked the radio again, growing more uneasy. It was working just fine a few minutes ago. Then, through the thickening fog, he saw it. A figure standing across the street, near a dark alley. A man, dressed in a tattered uniform, watching him. The man's face was obscured, but Dylan felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him. There was something wrong, something deeply unsettling about the figure. The way he stood, unmoving, like a shadow frozen in time. Hello? Dylan called out, his voice unsteady. He took a step forward, but the man didn't respond. He only stood there, like a ghost. A cold chill crept down Dylan's spine, but he couldn't take his eyes off the figure. The sirens continued to blare in the background, but it felt as though the world had become mute. The figure didn't move, not even a twitch. Dylan took another cautious step. Hey! Are you okay? But before he could get any closer, the figure disappeared. One moment he was there, and the next, nothing. No movement, no trace, just the empty street. His breath hitched. Panic began to claw at the edges of his mind. Something was wrong. The call. The wreck. The man. The strange figure. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, like a distant, almost imperceptible siren, but different. It wasn't the sound of the ambulance's wail. This one was faint, as though it was coming from far away, from an unknown source. Dylan whipped around, his heart racing. The faint light of the ambulance illuminated the fog in front of him, but he saw nothing but the fog itself. The distant siren grew louder, almost suffocating, filling his ears with its eerie call. But where was it coming from? There was no other ambulance. He hadn't seen anyone else on the road. His radio crackled, the voice coming through distorted, barely audible. "Dylan, run! Run now!" The words were almost too faint to make out, but they were clear enough to send a surge of terror through his veins. He looked back toward the wreck, still empty, and then back to where the figure had stood. But now, all that remained was a strange, oppressive silence. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the ambulance's siren stopped. The hum faded, and the night returned to its unnatural stillness. Dylan's mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? A hallucination? Or something far worse? His gut told him to leave. He turned back to the ambulance, his pulse pounding in his ears. He got back inside, started the engine, and sped away, the fog rolling in thicker around him as he headed back toward the hospital. But as he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. In the rearview mirror, he saw it. A flash of movement. A shadow, quick and fleeting, in the back of the ambulance. Dylan slammed on the brakes, heart in his throat. He whipped around, eyes scanning the empty cabin, but there was nothing. No one. But then the hum returned, softer this time, almost imperceptible, like it was lingering in the very air around him. The ambulance was empty. The streets were silent. But Dylan's gut told him something was following him. Something he couldn't see. Something he couldn't outrun. As he drove on, the faint sound of a distant siren echoed in the background, growing louder with every passing mile. And somewhere in the darkness, someone, or something, was watching him. And the vanishing ambulance was only the beginning. The morning after the unsettling events of the previous night, Dylan Matthews couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The fog still lingered in the air, wrapping the town in a blanket of unease, as if the entire world was holding its breath. But when he stepped into the Harrowsville General Hospital's break room, it felt almost like things had returned to normal. As normal as they could be, considering the eerie events of the previous shift. He tried to shake it off. A strange night, that's all. He had been overworked, stressed. The fog, the figure on Pine Street, the mysterious voice on the radio, all of it could be explained away with exhaustion. But deep down, Dylan knew there was something else. Something he couldn't explain. "Morning, Dylan," called out a voice from behind him. It was Lisa, one of the nurses on the night shift. She flashed him a smile, but there was something about it that seemed off, as if she was hiding something behind her bright eyes. "You look like you saw a ghost last night." Dylan forced a grin. "Maybe I did," he said, trying to joke it off. Lisa chuckled, but it sounded nervous. "It was quiet, wasn't it? Too quiet. I swear, I heard whispers in the halls after you left." Dylan's stomach churned. "Whispers?" "Yeah," she said, leaning in slightly. "Like someone was talking in the hallways when no one was there. Just a couple of soft voices, not loud enough to make out. I thought maybe it was just my imagination." Dylan's mind raced. It wasn't just Lisa. It seemed like everyone was feeling it. The strange, heavy air that clung to the hospital. He had a sudden thought, a terrifying thought, that it wasn't just the town. It wasn't just the ambulance or the fog. Something was wrong here, in this very building. "Anyway," Lisa continued, oblivious to Dylan's growing unease, "I hear you're on shift tonight again. You'll be fine. Just don't let your imagination get the better of you." She winked and walked away, leaving Dylan alone with his thoughts. The day passed in a haze. Dylan barely registered the hours slipping by as he tried to get some sleep before the next shift. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind replayed the strange events from the night before: the wrecked car, the ghostly figure, and that chilling hum that seemed to follow him wherever he went. His dreams were filled with dark, shadowy figures, moving just out of his reach. He woke up in a cold sweat more than once, unsure if the nightmares were real or if his mind was playing tricks on him. When night fell again, Dylan returned to Harrowsville General, trying to push aside the mounting dread. He was scheduled to work the evening shift, and as much as he hated to admit it, a part of him hoped it would be an uneventful night. But the moment he walked through the hospital doors, the air seemed different, thicker, heavier, almost as if the walls themselves were closing in. The night passed slowly at first, but around 2 a.m., the emergency room phone rang. Dylan grabbed the receiver with a sense of dread he couldn't explain. The voice on the other end was distorted, crackling with static. "Please, help us!" The voice was faint, desperate, and for a brief moment, Dylan thought he recognized it. It was the same voice from last night, the one that had called in the emergency on Pine Street. His heart skipped a beat. He tried to listen closely, but the line went silent for a moment before a sharp, guttural scream erupted from the receiver. Dylan yanked the phone away from his ear, his hand trembling. The voice was gone, but in its place was an unsettling static that seemed to reverberate in the air. His palms were sweating as he dialed the number back. The phone rang once, twice, then went dead. "Dylan?" came a voice behind him. He spun around to see Lisa standing in the doorway. She looked pale, her face drawn tight with worry. "What's going on? I just heard the phone ring. Was it another emergency?" Dylan didn't know how to respond. He had no answers, only a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. I don't know. It's just strange. Like last night. The call was the same, but there was no one on the other end." Lisa stepped closer, her eyes narrowing in concern. "Maybe it's just a prank. You know how people like to mess with the emergency lines, especially in a small town like this." But Dylan wasn't convinced. The voice had sounded too real, too urgent, and there was something in the way it crackled that made him uneasy. It wasn't just static, it was something else. Something familiar. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp bang from down the hall. The sound of a door slamming open. "Did you hear that?" Dylan asked, his voice low and tense. Lisa nodded, looking over her shoulder toward the hallway. "Yeah, I did. It came from the morgue." The morgue. Dylan felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It was a place he had never been to on his own, a part of the hospital he had never needed to visit. But tonight, for some reason, the thought of going down there filled him with dread. Without a word, Dylan began walking down the long corridor, Lisa at his side. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shadows that seemed to shift unnaturally as they approached the morgue. The temperature in the hallway had dropped significantly, and Dylan could see his breath in the cold air. As they reached the morgue's door, Dylan hesitated. The door was ajar, a faint light leaking from the crack. The unmistakable smell of antiseptic and decay wafted out, making his stomach churn. Lisa glanced at him, her expression filled with uncertainty. I don't think we should go in there," she whispered. But her voice was shaky, and Dylan could see the fear in her eyes. "Let's just check it out. We have to make sure everything's okay," Dylan said, pushing the door open with a creak. Inside, the morgue was silent. Too silent. The rows of metal drawers stretched out before them, each one a reminder of the many lives lost within these walls. But something was wrong. The hum, soft at first, was back. The same hum he had heard earlier, the one that seemed to come from nowhere. It echoed through the room, vibrating in the walls, and Dylan could feel it deep in his chest. Suddenly, one of the morgue drawers rattled, as though something inside was moving. Dylan froze. "Did you hear that?" Lisa's face had gone pale. "Oh God, Dylan, I think something's in there." Dylan's heartbeat quickened as he moved toward the drawer. He reached out with shaking hands and slowly pulled it open. The body inside was not one that Dylan had seen before. It was fresh, too fresh. And the sight of it made his stomach turn. The figure was bloated, discolored, and yet its eyes were open, staring straight at Dylan. But the worst part? The body was moving. Dylan stepped back, his blood running cold. The corpse's fingers twitched, and its mouth opened in a grotesque imitation of a scream, but no sound came. Lisa screamed, stumbling backward. "This is impossible! This can't be happening!" But Dylan couldn't move. His eyes were locked on the body, and in that moment, he realized something terrifying. The ambulance, the calls, the strange occurrences, they weren't isolated events. There was something far darker at work here, and it had begun to rise. Dylan couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his stomach as the morgue door slowly closed behind him. The corpse he had seen was no longer lying motionless on the table. It had risen. Its lifeless eyes, now eerily wide, had fixed on him as if to say something. But it wasn't the body that haunted Dylan's mind. No, it was something much more unsettling. The realization that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, about the ambulance calls he had been responding to. He couldn't shake the suspicion that the terror that had plagued the town was somehow tied to the people being transported in the back of those ambulances. The patients, the ones who had died, or at least they were supposed to have died, were somehow coming back to life. And they weren't coming back as they had been. They were coming back as something else. Something darker. The last few days had felt like a slow descent into madness. Each call, each encounter, felt like the pieces of a puzzle that were slowly starting to fit together, only to reveal a horrifying picture that Dylan wasn't ready to see. That night, as Dylan sat at the nurse's station, staring blankly at the computer screen, his mind couldn't stop replaying the events of the morgue. The body's grotesque, silent scream. The way it had moved despite being dead. "Dylan, you okay?" Lisa's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him out of his daze. He looked up, her concerned expression meeting his. He tried to smile, but it felt like a mask, as if he were wearing someone else's face. "Yeah, just tired," he replied, his voice hollow. Lisa didn't seem convinced. She walked over, lowering her voice. "Dylan, I know this sounds crazy, but I think I've seen something. Something I can't explain." Dylan felt a chill creep up his spine. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "I saw it again. Last night, in the hall near the emergency room. The same woman. The one from the ambulance. She was standing there, watching me. But when I looked again, she was gone." Dylan's heart skipped a beat. That name, that face, it was all coming back to him. He remembered the first ambulance call, the woman who had been in critical condition, the one who had died before reaching the hospital, the one whose body had mysteriously disappeared from the morgue. And now, Lisa was saying she had seen her. His thoughts were interrupted by the shrill sound of the emergency line ringing. Dylan picked up the receiver, trying to focus. "Harrowsville General, how can I help you?" His voice was steady, but the unease was there, deep in his chest. "This is Officer Harris from Pine Street." The voice on the other end crackled. "We've got another one. Same area, same circumstances. I need you to come out here, now." Dylan's pulse quickened. Pine Street. The same street where the first body had been found. He was about to ask more questions when the officer's voice cut him off. No time for questions. Just get here. You'll see what I mean. Dylan's hand shook as he placed the receiver back into its cradle. His mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle slipping into place one by one, but it didn't make sense. It was all too much. Lisa, we need to go. Now! Without waiting for her response, Dylan grabbed his coat and rushed out into the night, Lisa trailing behind him. The air outside had grown heavier. The fog from the previous night was back, thicker now, as if it was trying to swallow the town whole. The streetlights barely pierced the mist, casting an eerie, dim glow that seemed to stretch forever into the distance. The sound of Dylan's boots echoed in the quiet, as if the town itself was holding its breath. When they arrived at Pine Street, the scene before them made Dylan's stomach churn. The street was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the ambulance's engine. Its flashing lights painted the fog in streaks of red and blue, but there was no one around. No officers. No bystanders. He approached the ambulance cautiously, his every step dragging as though the air itself was trying to pull him back. The doors of the ambulance were wide open, but there was no sign of the officer who had called him. "Hello?" Dylan called out. His voice trembled, a fear rising in his chest that he couldn't name. There was no answer. Only the faint sound of wind brushing against the pavement. Lisa was standing behind him, her hands clasped together nervously. "Dylan, I don't like this. Something's wrong. This isn't right." "I know," Dylan muttered. "Let's check the back." When they stepped closer to the ambulance, the smell hit him, an overwhelming stench of rot and decay. He couldn't breathe for a moment, the foul odor clawing at his throat. Suddenly, the back doors swung shut with a loud bang. Dylan jumped back, his heart racing. He turned to Lisa, but her eyes were wide with fear. "Did you see that? It was like the ambulance was alive." Before Dylan could respond, a figure appeared from the fog. It was a woman, tall, with dark hair, wearing the same hospital gown that he had seen before. The same woman. The one from the calls. But this time, there was something different about her. Her skin was pale, unnaturally so, and her eyes, those eyes, were nothing but dark voids, empty and hollow. Dylan's heart pounded in his chest as she began walking toward them, her bare feet making no sound on the pavement. "Stay back!" Dylan shouted, but his voice was weak. The woman didn't seem to hear him. She kept coming closer, her eyes locked on him, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Then, with a sudden and chilling realization, Dylan understood. It wasn't just the ambulance that was the source of the terror. It wasn't just the patients they brought in. It was something far darker, far more ancient, that had been awakened. The woman was the key. Dylan staggered back, his mind racing. This wasn't just about the dead coming back to life. This was about something far older. Something that had been buried beneath the town's surface for decades, waiting for the right moment to rise again. And now, that moment had come. Before he could react, the woman let out a bone-chilling screech that echoed through the fog. Her eyes locked on Dylan, her mouth twisting into a grotesque smile. And just like that, she vanished, leaving nothing but the sound of her voice lingering in the mist. Dylan stood frozen, his blood turning cold. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. But one thing was clear. The terror had only just begun. Dylan could no longer deny the truth. The terror he had been running from, the horrible echo that had haunted him ever since he first laid eyes on that ambulance, had caught up with him. The woman, the patient, the corpse that had disappeared from the morgue, wasn't just a ghost or a figment of his imagination. She was something far more sinister. And Dylan knew deep down that it was his fault. He had been part of this nightmare from the beginning. As he sat in the darkened ambulance bay, Staring at the fog that now seemed to envelop the entire town, his thoughts were consumed by one question: how could he stop this? The woman had vanished in the mist, but her presence lingered like a shadow in the back of his mind. Her hollow eyes, that twisted, gaping smile. He couldn't escape the feeling that she was always watching, always waiting for him. Every corner he turned, every alleyway he passed, he expected her to appear, her pale face staring back at him from the darkness. But this was no ordinary haunting. It was a curse. A curse that had been buried long before he ever set foot in Harrowsville. Dylan had started piecing things together, slowly but surely, though he had no idea how far the horrors ran. The ambulance calls, the deaths, the missing bodies, all of it was connected. But the most disturbing realization of all was that the woman he had seen was the key. She was the one who had been chosen to carry out the vengeance that had been set in motion long ago. Dylan's hands trembled as he picked up his phone, dialing Lisa's number. The call went straight to voicemail. He had tried reaching her for hours, but each time he called, there was no answer. It had been like that since the last encounter. Lisa had been so shaken, so terrified, that she had refused to speak about what had happened. He had begged her to meet him, to figure this out together, but now he was beginning to fear that Lisa might have become part of the nightmare herself. Without waiting for her response, Dylan threw on his coat and rushed out the door. He had no plan, no clear path forward, just a deep, gnawing feeling that time was running out. He had to find the answers, or this curse would continue. As he stepped outside, the air was even thicker than before. The fog was now dense enough to block out the streetlights, making it feel as if he had entered some kind of twisted dream. Each step he took seemed to echo in the silence, his feet dragging through the wet ground like lead. The ambulance bay was eerily empty. Not a single vehicle in sight. Not even a single soul. It was as though the town itself had vanished, swallowed by the darkness. He turned towards the old cemetery at the edge of town. It was always the place where people avoided going after dark, where strange whispers had always been heard, where rumors of old burial grounds and long-forgotten rituals had persisted for generations. Dylan had no idea why, but the place had always drawn him in. Something about it felt like the final piece of the puzzle. The cemetery gates were ajar, creaking in the wind as he stepped inside. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and decay. The tombstones rose like silent sentinels in the mist, their engraved names barely visible through the fog. Dylan's footsteps faltered when he reached the center of the cemetery, his breath catching in his throat. There, standing amidst the gravestones, was the woman, the same woman he had seen before, her white hospital gown flowing in the mist, her hollow eyes fixed on him. Her expression was unreadable, but Dylan could feel the weight of her gaze as if she were staring directly into his soul. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. You've been waiting for me," Dylan managed to whisper, his voice barely audible. The woman tilted her head, her mouth stretching into that twisted, ghastly smile. "You knew," she whispered in return, her voice cold and distant, like the wind itself. "You knew this would happen. You've been part of it from the start." Dylan's blood ran cold. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. She was right. He had been involved. He had been part of the chain of events that had led to this. He had helped transport the dead. He had been the one who kept answering the calls. He had been the one who kept ignoring the signs. Every ambulance ride, every patient brought in, the woman had been there, waiting for her moment to strike. He stepped forward, his legs trembling beneath him. "What do you want from me?" he choked out, his voice breaking. "Nothing," she said softly, her smile never fading. "You've already given it all." Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled. The fog swirled violently, and a low, guttural sound filled the air, like something ancient, something buried, awakening from its slumber. Dylan's mind was racing. This was the end. There was no escape. He had failed. Before he could react, the earth beneath him gave way, and he found himself falling. The world spun around him, darkness consuming him, as the woman's chilling laughter echoed in his ears. When he awoke, he was no longer in the cemetery. Instead, he found himself in a small, dark room. His hands were bound to a cold metal chair. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. And standing before him, her cold gaze locked on his, was the woman. But now, she was not alone. Behind her stood hundreds of other figures, silent, pale figures in hospital gowns, their faces just as lifeless and twisted as the woman's. They were the ones who had been brought in, the ones who had died on the ambulance rides, the ones who had never truly left. The woman stepped forward, her icy fingers brushing Dylan's cheek. "You never should have come back," she whispered. And with that, the figures closed in on him, the darkness swallowing him whole. The last thing Dylan heard was the sound of an ambulance siren in the distance, growing fainter as the town fell silent.